What's good, YouTubers and YouTubettes? This is JB Sports, back again with another one. Former two-time welterweight champion Shawn Porter has a podcast called The Porter Way Podcast, and they had an anniversary special, if I'm not mistaken, and they had two special guests commiserating that podcast being on for 1 year, if I'm not mistaken. I believe that's what it was. It was some kind of anniversary special because they was on a stage and they had two high-profile athletes as guests. One former NFL player, Shawn Marion. I did not catch that interview, but I did catch an interview involving WBO welterweight champion Terence Crawford. And Terence Crawford has some interesting comments in regards to a potential matchup with unified welterweight champion Errol Spence Jr. And I believe this is what Terence Crawford and his team are banking on. They're banking on the public demand for this fight, and they're using that as leverage to not accept the PBC offer, in particular the guarantee that the PBC has offered TC. Now, Terence Crawford said in the interview that his children want to fight. They've done videos saying we want Errol. He says he's sure that Errol Spence Jr. is being asked that question every day when he's out in the public. They're asking Errol Spence Jr. when he's going to fight Terence Crawford. He says when he's out and about, the public asking him about the Errol Spence Jr. fight. And I believe he's using that as leverage. He knows that he's got the last piece to the puzzle. He also knows that Errol Spence Jr. has been stating this for a while now, that he wants to become undisputed and move up to 154, that he was going to clean up his side of the street. He said this face-to-face with Terence Crawford. He was going to clean up his side of the street, and then he would come see Terence Crawford. Terence Crawford knows this, and I believe they're using that as leverage. They don't believe that Errol Spence Jr. will walk away from negotiations. They don't believe that Errol Spence Jr. will get sick and tired of Terence Crawford's act and move on. But we got a deadline coming up, ladies and gentlemen. I texted this out on one of the YouTube channels. I can't remember. I believe it was, I put this on Errol Spence Jr. Twitter. I said, look, I believe that Labor Day weekend is the deadline. If this fight is not announced by Labor Day weekend, that's the first week in September, then this fight is not happening, unfortunately. But one thing I can state as a fact, Errol Spence Jr. is going to fight before the end of the year. He's going to fight in November. The 19th is the likely date, and it will be on Showtime pay-per-view. Now, I don't know who he's going to be fighting. Several names have been mentioned. Keith one-time Thurman. Errol Spence Jr. has said that he's never going to fight Keith Thurman because he's still upset that Keith Thurman didn't get him an opportunity when he was coming up in the ranks. Now, you got the WBA mandatory, which is the first in line. I believe this is before the WBC mandatory, which has Keith one-time Thurman as the #1 contender. The WBA is the first order of business, and that would involve a fight with Errol Spence Jr. taking on Matthias Stellionis. But Errol Spence Jr. has also said that if he doesn't get the Terence Crawford fight, he's moving up to 154. Now, it's not a lot of intriguing fights at 154. All the belts are held by one guy, Jermell Lyons Only Charlo. He got a fight versus Tim Tszyu in January. So, you know, if you go up there and fight like a Tony Harrison, that's not really a big fight. It's a non-title fight. And it's a very high-risk, low-reward type of fight. You know, you can fight, you know, J. Rock Williams, and that, you know, that fight, even though you're moving up, that almost be looked at as a tune-up fight. As J. Rock Williams has not looked good in recent fights. You know, that'll be a big fight. You know, you got Dallas versus Philadelphia. If you want to use an NFL angle, NFC East angle, maybe that'll sell the fight. But is that a big pay-per-view fight? You know, that's be a good fight as far as debut at 154. But could Showtime put that on pay-per-view? You know, I think they would have to put that on pay-per-view due to the amount of money that Errol Spence Jr. is accustomed to making. And J. Rock Williams ain't going to come cheap either. So I believe that fight probably would end up on pay-per-view, but that fight really does very little for Errol Spence Jr. Now, a fight that I think would be a little bit more intriguing is move up to 160 pounds and fight the regular WBA champion Ezri Lara. Fight him at a catch weight. He said he'd be willing to go down to 155 and fight Danny Garcia and Keith Thurman. Well, Keith, you know, and Errol Spence Jr., is bigger than both of those guys right now. He's a unified champion, and he's got more stature and more appeal than any one of those two guys. You know, I think that would probably be a bigger fight with Earl Lara. Errol Spence Jr. moves up and fights him at a catch weight of 155 pounds. Now, they could put that fight on pay-per-view, and that fight will sell. As he'll be going from one Cuban and Udanis Ugas, as he dismounted and then dissected and destroyed him, and going up to fight another Cuban at a high weight. So that'd be a good selling point for that fight. With all that being said, Terence Crawford is using the fact that the public demand, the public salivating over this fight. He don't believe that Errol Spence Jr. is going to be able to turn his back on that fight, and he believes that Errol Spence Jr. is going to stay patient while him being Terence Crawford and the PBC continue to negotiate and hopefully come to agreement on the guarantee. But I believe the PBC has got a number that they're set on. I don't believe they're going to move off their number. So only thing I can see is maybe Errol Spence Jr. says, okay, you know what I agreed to for this fight, I'll take a little bit of less, and y'all give that to Terence Crawford, and let's make the fight happen. That could be a play for Terence Crawford and his team and what they're thinking right now, because right now we're at a holding point. We're at a holding pattern. It ain't nothing moving right now. This is what you call negotiations being stalled, or better word, stalled negotiations. That's what's going on right now. There ain't nothing going on right now because the PBC got their number and Crawford got his number. And neither side is willing to move off that. That's why Terence Crawford is putting the pressure on Errol Spence Jr., saying, look, man, you know the public wants this fight. You cannot walk away from this fight. I know the PBC is trying to throw Keith Thurman up there, and they throwing Emmanuel Stadionis up there, but you cannot walk away from this fight, Errol. My kids are doing videos saying they want me to fight you. Every time I walk down the street in Omaha, Nebraska, I can't walk 5 feet without somebody asking me about the Errol Spence Jr. fight. I'm sure you're going through the same thing out there in DeSoto. Everywhere you go, they're asking you about Terence Crawford. So he's putting the pressure on Errol Spence Jr. And like I said, he also knows that Errol Spence Jr. has been saying for a long time that it's strap season. And once he cleans up his side of the street, that he would come see Terence Crawford for Undisputed. So we will see what happens, and we will see what transpires. But like I said earlier, Labor Day weekend, if this fight is not announced, it's not happening. Terence Crawford will move on. Most likely take on this WBO mandatory. Virgil Ortiz is not going to take that fight next. I'm telling you that right now. So it's going to be the next highest ranked fighter. Golden Boy promotion is not looking to put Virgil Ortiz in there with Terence Crawford. Now, Virgil Ortiz is coming back before the end of the year. From what I'm hearing, they're looking at Alex Rocha or Blair the Flair Cobb. Woo! They're looking at one of those two. Virgil Ortiz, so he's going to have to be looking at I don't know who's up under him. I think Boots Ennis is behind Virgil Ortiz, if I'm not mistaken. So, you know, that could be a possible matchup, but I don't know if Crawford would take that fight. Crawford might just move up to 154 if that's the case. But again, likely opponent is somebody in the WBO. If Boots Ennis maybe decides to go the IBF route, I don't know who's behind Boots Ennis, the next highest ranked fighter. And then another question is, who's going to put on that fight? As we know, Terence Crawford is without a promoter, is without a network. So, maybe Golden Boy Promotions will put on that fight and say, all right, you take this fight, and then after that, we'll match you up with Virgil Ortiz. Maybe he gets like a 2-fight deal with Golden Boy Promotions, or maybe he signs with Matchroom Boxing Eddie Hearn. And they say, okay, we're going to put you on with a couple of fights out here in the UK, and it's all going to lead to a big welterweight showdown with Conor Benn. So we will see what happens, and we will see what transpires. Let me know your thoughts about the whole Errol Spence Jr., Terence Crawford saga. Follow me on Facebook, Gerard.Briscoe.3551. Like, share, and subscribe to JB Sports, the man, the myth, the legend. And I holla.